Hey my good friends, Sam Haymart for Test Driven TV. Finally got my chance to do a complete test drive review of the 2017 aluminum bodied F-Series Super Duty. This is an F-250 Power Stroke diesel complete with the King Ranch package, fully loaded truck just about. We're going to do a walk around, take it on and off road, and really give you an idea of what it's like to live with. Now before we get out on the test drive, we're going to talk about styling just a little bit because this is all new. This is, of course, the first aluminum bodied Super Duty truck. It shares a lot of its underlying body structure with the F-150, but there are a lot of differences. They didn't just bring it on over. It has completely different exterior sheet metal. Up here at the front, you can see it's got a taller hood. And these days, you know, trucks, very popular is the brick wall face. It's not sleek and kick back like they were just a few years ago. It's straight up and down. Right here on the top of the hood, you've got Super Duty stamped right there into the aluminum. Kind of a nice touch. And this truck does have a unique grille for the trim grade. This has got several different grills you can get across the line. Down here in the grille, you can see below, this has a camera right there, and we'll talk about that here in a minute. This has a full camera system on it. Tow hooks built right in down there. This has the FX4 package, the off-road. Another thing up here beside this chrome grille is you've got the LED headlights. Now these are an option, a very expensive option at that. They look very good, but you're going to pay for them if you like them. They've got a nice light up there with a signature daytime running light, and you've got the dual quads when it comes to the LED driving light. So boy, if you like them, prepare to spend out because they are a pretty pricey option. Nice looking truck though. I have to admit, when I first saw this, I wasn't really jazzed about it, but now that I see it in three-dimensional form, this face is actually starting to grow on me a little bit. Coming around the side here, first thing I want to point out is this has the optional 20-inch wheel on it, one of many wheel options on this truck. These are pretty nice. They've got painted pockets. Also here, we've got power extending and foldable mirrors here. Very nice touch. They can come out, so if you've got a wider trailer and you need to get around that with your mirrors, you can do that on the fly. Very nice touch. Also optioned on this truck are the power extending running boards. When you open the doors, front or back, they just motor on out. The nice thing about them is they've got a full rubber liner, so you can put a boot up on them when they're wet. You're not going to slip off. The only thing you really have to be careful about is to be not standing too close where they're going to get your shin when they come out. Out here at the back of the F-250, on the back corner right here, you might notice something a little bit different. This taillight's actually got a little bit of a radar sensor built into it, and what that's for is the blind spot information system. Now, a lot of vehicles have that, not a big deal, but this one can be programmed to take into account your trailer. So if you're on the road and you're trying to make that lane change, it's not only going to take into account your truck, but whatever length of trailer that you've got programmed in there. So if you don't see them, it's going to let you know. That's what that is right there. Now this also has a lot of cameras you're going to see here. There's two on the tailgate. There's one up there, right up there by the third brake light. There's one on each side mirror, and there's one on the front grille, and that's because this has the 360-degree camera system, but it's also set up that you can get different views when you're backing up to a trailer and setting up that way. It's very versatile, and I will demonstrate that here in a short bit when it comes to trying to park this thing. It's really quite an amazing feature. Also, soft opening tailgate. Most trucks have that now, not a big deal, but this is something that is a Ford exclusive. It is the folding step, a standalone option, and what it does is it really allows you to get in and out of the back of this truck quite easy without having to get your knees on the bumper or slip and fall. I like this because even though a lot of guys out there might be fit and jumping in and out of the truck's not a big deal, not everybody is, and that's really a helpful tool. I like it. Spray and bed liner, that is optional on this truck, another standalone option. Lots of options on this truck. This has the LED lighting here in the bed. It's very bright at night. Cleat system, and down there is the plug for your fifth wheel trailer setup, and that's because this has the fifth wheel prep package. Also down here in the bed there's plugs because the framework to install your fifth wheeler gooseneck setup is right here built in from the factory. It's a great thing. Last option back here right there, as you can see, the rear window, power sliding rear window. It's frameless, nice looking window, and it's nice to be able to open that thing up when you've got a nice breeze and just let it flow. Now, if you've been in the new F-150 or soon the new Ford Expedition, you're going to find this interior pretty familiar because it's the standard interior across the board for all of Ford's trucks, their full-size trucks. And it does have a few differences from the F-150, and that being trim. Over here on the dash, it's got a big panel that says Super Duty, and a lot of the F-150s do have a shifter down here on the console. This one has a column shift exclusively, and because we are in the King Ranch here, this has a really nice leather trim in here, nice brown, chocolate brown leather, and it has orange accent stitching, piping, and of course the King Ranch logo is inset in the seats here on top of the console lid, and it's just very prominent here on the interior. And one thing I will say about this, I think it's a little bit more tasteful than the previous King Ranch versions, which were a little louder, let's say. I liked them, but this is definitely toned down a little bit, I think. Now, the other thing that this has here is genuine wood trim here on the door panels, and the materials in here are generally of a pretty high quality, just like I found with the F-150s I've tested in the past. The one thing, of course, is that there is some cheap things here and there. Like over here on the door, you've got kind of a really cheap switch panel here that looks really out of place next to genuine wood and the chrome trims, things like that, but that's always been the case with trucks. You've got a lot of base pieces that are part of what you might find in the base trims, and then as you go up the trim grades, you get all the nice stitch stuff, and you still have some of those cheap pieces here. Now, the gauge cluster here, a little bit unique to this truck because it does have extra gauges and a little bit more information and some pages for a lot of the extra things that this truck has, especially with the turbo gauge, some of the towing apps, things like that. Here on the steering wheel, nice big thick steering wheel, all the controls you'll ever need. The four-wheel drive controls right over here on the dash where you can get to them easy. The trailer brake controller down here a little bit low where you do have to sort of lean in to get to it, but it's there. It's a nice touch to have. Now, center stack on this one, we've got all the buttons and hard controls that duplicate most everything you're going to have on your infotainment system, and the buttons are actually big enough that you can use them with work gloves, and that was something Ford pointed out when they first released this interior. Very important thing because a lot of people do actually wear gloves, at least even in the winter if they're not work gloves. When it comes to storage, lots of it going on here. Down here on the side of the console, a nice big pocket down there, and there's a cubby down here for your phone. You can put pretty big phones down there, and you've got USB ports down there for that. Here in the center, because there's no shifter, there's a big huge area down here where you can put some things, but this also has an innovative cup holder here with a sliding panel where you can actually make this into 4 cup holders instead of just 2 if you need them. Down here inside the center console, lots of storage. You can actually put a whole 12-pack of anything that you want to drink down in here, and other stuff. It doesn't have to be a 12-pack, but there's just lots of space. And here at the back of the console, there's actually 2 more cup holders for those folks back there in the back seat. Now, sitting here, these are very comfortable chairs, just like I found in the F-150, and these are almost identical, but they're slightly different. These are, of course, power adjustable in this particular truck, and there are memory settings here. And this one also has a power tilt and telescoping steering wheel, which is a pretty nice touch in a big, huge truck like this. Outward view, you know, it's a big truck, and it's just what it is. If you drive a truck like this, you get used to it. You can see the hood out there almost all the way out to the end because it's pretty flat, which is nice. Gives you a pretty good idea of perimeter out there. Out here in the back seat, it's a very spacious place to be because of the cab size. These seats about halfway forward, halfway back, and as you can see, I've got a lot of room to spread out. The one thing I'd point out here, as you can see also, is this is a pretty low seat for such a big truck, and all the headroom I've got, even with my hat on, I would have thought they could have raised this up a little bit because honestly, this isn't that comfortable. But that said, at least you can move around and get comfortable. There's a lot of amenities back here. You've got vents, and of course this one has heated seats. That is a standalone option. Now, one very cool thing about these seats is they do fold upward in a 60-40 split, which gives you a flat load floor down there to put big things, gear, whatever you want in here. There's also a storage area down there that you can fold up partitions, and that allows you to lay things in there to keep them from rolling all over the place. But more important, you can put these seats back down and they're lockable that way. And you know what that means? That means we're talking lockable storage area, and that means firearms where it's legal, you can actually have a safe place to keep those in there, and it's long enough for a rifle. And it's large enough for 2 or 3 of them, I'd say, but you can put anything in there that you want to keep locked up. It's just a nice thing that you can lock the seats down and utilize that as a lockable space. Overall, I'm very impressed with this interior. I like this King Ranch theme. I always have, and even though I said it's a little bit more tasteful than it used to be a little louder before, I liked it before too, I have to admit. So it's a nice way to go if you're into the cowboy western store sort of theme. Materials in here, there are a little bit of hit and miss things going on, but storage, usability, and the overall comfort living in here, very, very good. Interior, it's 4 out of 5 stars. On the subject of infotainment, this of course, because it's a fully loaded truck, has the top end system here, which is the Sync 3 touchscreen. It has navigation, it has all manner of Sirius, AM, FM, plus Bluetooth connection to your phone, Apple CarPlay, Android Auto connectivity, and it has a Sony back end for audio, which sounds very, very good. Now the Sync 3, I have been very happy with it in all the vehicles I found it in, because the new menu, the graphics, everything works so much better than the old My 4 Touch. It's unbelievable how much better it is. Not only does it look better, it behaves better, and it's much easier to use. And best of all, they have hard controls here that duplicate that which is in the menu. That being, you've got volume, you've got tuning, and you've got buttons here that you can use for a lot of common things. And the HVAC, you're not forced to go into the menu system and use that to do a lot of your adjustments, especially for things here like the heated and the cooled seats. In some of the vehicles it used to be, you had to go in here and you had to get into menus for that stuff, and there's just no need for that. So I'm very impressed with what they've done here, especially in a truck application like this. One thing this has that's an option on this truck is the full 360-degree camera system, and this also has the extra trailer camera system, which I didn't really get into here, but this system is really good for backing this thing up into a tight parking space or putting it straight into a parking space, because you can get a full bird's eye view of everything around this truck, right up to the bumper, on the sides where those lines are, and even up front. You can press the button and get a view out front. And I know a lot of folks out there say, well, if you can't back up a truck without that fancy camera, you don't deserve one. I get it. But at the same time, this is awesome. It's so awesome, because at my office complex, I've got a really tight compact space under a covered awning with a post right next to on that line, and this made it a one-shot backup every single time. It was so easy to just guide myself with the camera, look at the mirrors, and be able to get that back bumper 6 inches away from a concrete block wall and just fit that truck tightly into a space next to all the other cars. Technology's good. It's not a crutch. I mean, I could still do it without it, but it sure makes it a lot easier. So I'm very happy with this, very happy with the technology and the infotainment here. It gets 5 out of 5 stars. Under the hood of our tester, of course, is a 6.7 liter Power Stroke turbo diesel V8. This is an in-house designed and built engine by Ford. They no longer get an engine supply by Navistar, which is a good thing, because that was a terrible disaster. So it's been several years since then, but a lot of people remember that. 440 horsepower and 925 pound-feet of torque. And it comes, of course, mated exclusively to a 6-speed heavy-duty automatic transmission. I always ask the question, how does it go? Woo! Once you get moving, this thing's got a good push in the back. And 60, well, that didn't take very long. Now, it didn't feel super fast, but it's actually pretty quick. 440 horsepower, 925 pound-feet of torque. That's a lot. Now, this truck does weigh a lot. I mean, this weighs as much as 2 conventional automobiles, at least. It moves along pretty well. Now, obviously, the real test of a truck like this when it comes to power, and this powertrain is towing. I'm not able to do that for you today, folks, but I am telling you that this is a very strong push in the back when you're driving around empty, that's for sure. And this transmission doesn't miss a beat. It's right on there with nice, smooth, and refined shifts. They've done a good job there. And the nice thing about it is, unlike the General Motors and the Cummins with the Ram, those trucks, I've tended to feel like those transmissions were pretty rough in the way they shift. Now, some might say, well, that's because they're tough. This is a tough transmission. It survives just fine, and it does it in a very refined way. It's much smoother in its operation. Now, fuel economy, they don't rate these trucks for fuel economy, not the way they do other ones that are lighter where you actually have EPA estimates. But in my week with it, I actually achieved 15 miles per gallon with this, which is pretty good for something this large and heavy. Now, obviously, that's going to be less if you tow, but I'm pretty impressed with this powertrain, as I've always been. Powertrain gets 5 out of 5 stars. To get an idea for handling, I really wanted to bring this truck out here to this particular road, which is Apache Trail up here in the Tonto National Forest. And that's because this is the very road I tested the last Super Duty pickup truck on. Why is that significant? Well, just like the last one, this one has a solid front axle because it's got 4-wheel drive. And the last Super Duty truck I drove up here didn't handle so well up here on this bumpy pavement because that solid front axle is very heavy, just like a rear solid axle, and it bounced and it jumped all over the place. And I'm glad to report that This particular solid axle on this all-new chassis, much better controlled than the last generation Super Duty as I go around these corners over this bumpy pavement with ribbles and patches. With sort of a washboard surface on some of these curves, this actually does very well. I'm not getting any shuddering in the steering. I'm not getting any bouncing in that front axle. It's exceptionally well controlled, so I'm pretty impressed there. And overall, so far, I can really tell how much stiffer this chassis is. Fully boxed steel frame, they tell me some 24 times stiffer than the last generation Super Duty frame, which helps this truck feel every bit as solid as the old steel-bodied Super Duty. Out here on a more wide open highway at highway speeds, the ride with this new chassis is, again, a lot more solid and a lot more quiet than the last generation Super Duty, which itself wasn't noisy and bad, but this is a huge improvement. And that was a concern that I hear about from a lot of people, was with this new aluminum body, is it going to feel flimsier? And the fact of the matter is, because they have made this frame, as they said, up to 24 times stronger, the fact that the aluminum body might be a little bit lighter doesn't have an effect on the overall feel of this truck. It still feels very heavy because it is. It just has a nice, solid, stable ride going down the road, and it's quiet, very little wind noise. And even with the solid axle, as I found out there on the windy road, the steering is still pretty direct and it feels pretty confident, even throwing it into a curve at highway speeds. So I'm pretty impressed with the chassis, at least on the pavement. Now we're going to drive this along and see what this thing's like on the washboard road. It could be really good or it might suck. That's always a question mark with pickup trucks, is how are they going to feel on the washboard road, because they're built differently than a crossover SUV that's got a solid body structure. We're body on frame here. And this isn't off-roading, but this washboard road can really take even the best vehicles out there and make them feel like a complete pile of crap. And so out here on the washboard road, the first thing I'm really picking up on is the fact that this frame is tight. The suspension is tight to the frame, and there's a good level of rubber isolation going on. And like I've talked about before, up on the bumpy road, the one concern I had, especially with this truck because of its solid front axle, it's a pretty heavy piece of equipment out there that's unsprung. What's it going to feel like when these ruts and this rib surface really start playing on my steering inputs, when I'm going around corners, and generally affecting what is otherwise called refinement? So what I'm finding out here is it's actually pretty impressive. I'm not getting the kind of shudder and the judder in the front suspension that I might have expected. In fact, this is very much just like the last F-150 I drove out here. It's pretty solid. Now, the one thing that is happening is over some of this vibrating surface is the doors are rattling and jiggling in their frames just a little bit. I'm getting a little bit of shudder from the trim. Nothing overly bad, but it is something that is pretty typical of trucks, and it is worth noting. Out here on a little bit tighter of an off-road trail. Now, this is not hardcore off-roading. This is just a tight little trail that I like to take vehicles on. Gives me a good idea of how the suspension articulates, and in this case, the FX4 off-road package, how that suspension feels. This has Rancho shocks, and with that package you also get hill descent control and you get skid plates. Now, what I'm finding is, even though this vehicle is positively huge, it still feels very maneuverable out here, and this does have the variable ratio steering, which does play a part in that. It speeds up when you're doing things like this, so you don't have to have nearly as much steering input. But the suspension and the ground clearance here really does offer a lot of articulation and obviously ability to go out in places where you couldn't go maybe in the two-wheel drive version. Anyway, I'm very impressed here. Chassis gets 5 out of 5 stars. When it comes to quality, a very important measure in all my test drive reviews, I literally look at every corner and crevice of a vehicle. I listen for rattles. And what we found out here in our test drive is, like we talked about with the interior, very good materials, and they're probably one of the best in the business, but there still are a few hit and miss areas where you've got cheap things right up next to expensive things, and it just seems a little off-putting. Paint finish on the outside, another area where I noticed a few things, like here on the cab, a nice mirror finish. Out here on the bed, a little bit more of an orange peel. Right here side by side, you do notice a difference just staring at yourself there in the paint finish. So there are a few areas, in addition to the rattle or two we had in the cab over that washboard road, that I do think they could improve, but still overall, very good. 4 out of 5 stars. All right, my friends, wrapping it up for the Ford F-Series Super Duty, the F-250 King Ranch. I liked it. I had a pretty good time driving this truck, and as you can see, we put a lot of miles on it. We covered a lot of ground with this test and even got it a little bit dusty. I would have preferred mud, but there's no rain right now here in the desert, so dust is the best I could do, folks. Now, looking at the price here, wow, this one's 78 grand just about. Now, the funny thing is you can still spend another $10,000, $15,000 on this truck without even blinking. There's still more money to be spent here. And this engine, of course, being about a $9,000 option all by itself. And so the thing to really keep in mind here is that nobody ever pays full price for these things. Never, ever, ever pay full price for a truck like this. Expect $10,000 to $15,000 off. And so at this price, not that great a value. 65, 67, okay, that might be a little bit better, but at this price, we put value at 4 out of 5 stars. When you put that in with everything we've already talked about today, that's 4.5 stars for the review. Very, very good for a full-size truck. I'm Sam Haymart for Test Driven TV. I hope you enjoyed the ride. Little personal story, I actually grew up driving a truck just like this. Back in 1983, my parents, they bought one of the first diesel-powered Ford pickups. It was a 6.9-liter International Harvester V8, naturally aspirated. It had very little power. I want to say it was like 151 horsepower or 160, somewhere right around there. But I learned to drive in that truck later on, and then subsequently they got several others in a row. Lots of those trucks around. My dad used them for his trucking company, and I spent many thousands of miles in my youth driving these trucks. And so this really just feels like home to me in a lot of ways. But the ironic thing is, even though this has become modern, a lot more power, a lot more refined, a lot more creature comforts, it feels very much like home. So if you've driven these Ford trucks for a long time, maybe several generations of them, you're not going to be disappointed with this one bit. It's very nice. Anyway, if you like the test drive you just saw, click on the big round logo right there, subscribe to my YouTube channel. I do test drive 1 or 2 vehicles a week, or if you're just into diesels, click right there, see our diesel playlist. A lot of videos there on different trucks and cars. Anyway, either way, stay tuned.